Oh, I can already hear professional portrait painters. Alex, have you lost your mind? What do you mean your first portrait should be ugly? Shame on you. But here's what I think they forget. First, you have to make the thing before you can make it good. You have to go through the whole process, from an empty canvas to something that at least resembles a human being. It doesn't really matter how beautiful it is yet, because you can't improve a process you've never actually finished. Second, if you try to make your first portrait look like a real person, you're probably going to be disappointed. It won't look exactly like them, because likeness is a completely separate problem on top of all the other problems you're already trying to solve. So forget the pressure and paint someone who doesn't exist. And third, don't use a portrait by someone who has been painting faces for 20 years as a reference, and try to make yours look exactly like theirs. You'll probably end up comparing every brushstroke with theirs instead of figuring out what works for you. Just paint someone. For this one, I'm not even using a photo or a reference, and I genuinely have no idea who's going to appear on this canvas. Maybe it'll be a man, maybe a woman, maybe someone completely different. Hell, maybe it'll be an alien. Actually, here's one of my alien portraits, and this is exactly what I mean. When the person you're painting doesn't exist, you can play with the forms however you want. Make the nose longer, move the jaw, change the skull, destroy something and paint it again. There's no fear of losing the likeness, because there is no likeness. There's no one to disappoint and nothing to be embarrassed about. It's just you, the brush, and the paint. The nose ends 1/3 of the way up from the bottom of the face. Then divide that last third in half, and that gives us the shadow under the lower lip, just like this. Nothing scientific. We're simply giving the features somewhere to live. The jawline is made from 2 lines. One comes down from the chin, and the upper one travels back toward the ear. Don't try to make it smooth yet. And the hairline sits halfway through the upper half of our square, or somewhere around there. We're painting a person, not filing architectural plans. Now, pay attention to the ear, because it gives us 2 useful landmarks. The top sits at the same height as the eyebrows, while the bottom lines up with the end of the nose. Of course, every person is different, so if yours doesn't match perfectly, nothing terrible has happened. Just keep the relationship in mind. Now let's fill in the darkest areas, behind the ear, beneath the jaw, and down into the neck. The eye sockets are also in shadow, and that shadow flows into the shadow along the nose. If this becomes confusing, just touch your own face. It's the best reference you always have with you, and, as a bonus, a refreshing facial massage. Then we have the cheekbone, 1 diagonal line, 1 straight line, and another diagonal line. And of course, darken the hollow at the temple. Think of it as an Iron Man mask. Now squeeze out some black paint and prepare for some serious painting. Yes, prepare very, very, very well. Better than me. I would say we're about to paint the hair, but first, I need a clean brush. Unfortunately, this is where I screwed up. I forgot to turn on the camera. So I'll simply show you the same brush movements again. Just take the black paint and put it wherever the hair is supposed to be, following the waves as loosely as you can. Keep it a little messy. Don't try to control every stroke. Anything extra can always be removed later. Like here, where I use the background color to cut back into the hair. This lets me erase the extra black without actually erasing anything, while keeping the edge loose and natural. I'm just tracing the shape of the profile. Now, with a light bluish color, I spread the paint across the background and cut into what I've already painted. This removes the excess and lets me make the profile cleaner and elegant. We'll keep repeating this whenever the shape feels wrong, until we find a version we like. Or maybe we won't. Who knows? Here I'm marking the lighter areas around the mouth, then using those highlights to refine the lips and make their shape just a little more precise. By the way, I have an oil painting course with all the basics, techniques, and little tricks you need to build a solid foundation. I'll leave the link in the description. Now let's add the main skin tone. I want this portrait to look tanned, with a warmer southern character, so I'm using more yellow ochre and much less white. I'm not looking for the final skin color yet. I just need a middle tone connecting the deepest shadows to the lighter areas we'll add later. Technically, we could cover every unpainted part of the face with this color. Then we could paint the lighter areas over it with a brighter mixture. That would work, and it might even be faster. But I want you to see where each tone belongs, so I'm only placing this mixture in the areas where I know it definitely exists. Those are the areas sitting directly beside the dark shapes we already painted, around the eye socket, along the nose, beneath the cheekbone, around the mouth, and near the edge of the jaw. A face isn't a cube. It doesn't have sharp corners where darkness suddenly stops and light begins. Most of its forms are rounded, so the amount of light changes gradually as the surface turns toward or away from it. That means the darkest areas are usually followed by middle tones before we reach the light. Think of this color as a bridge between shadow and light. For now, I'm just following the dark shapes and letting this warmer tone soften their edges while building the volume of the face. The cheekbones, bridge of the nose, forehead, area above the lips and chin catch the most light and become our lightest areas. I added some white, so the mixture is now white, yellow ochre, English red, and a drop of iron oxide. With it, I'm covering all the lighter areas we left unpainted. Watch the brush. I'll add a little extra paint to the tip of the nose and the eyelids, because those areas catch stronger highlights. The great thing about oils is that the paint stays wet. You can soften an edge, change a shape, remove paint, or repaint an area whenever you want. Mistakes are cheap, which makes oils much less stressful than acrylics. Or maybe I'm simply used to them. I haven't painted this kind of portrait in a while, and returning to it feels good. It's like going back to the gym after a long break, grabbing the bar and discovering you can still do a pull-up. You look at your hands, hear Thor in your head and think, I'm still worthy. All right, the lips and the eyes. Here's how they connect. The inner corner of the eye usually lines up with the corner of the mouth. So I need to make corrections because her mouth looks extremely long and her eyes look too close together. In academic drawing, that would be considered a mistake. But here's my question. Do people with these proportions exist? Of course they do. This brings us back to the video's point. Your first portrait is easier to paint from imagination using a construction like this. Correct the proportions, or keep the face, and decide that this is what your imaginary person looks like. By the way, do you know why traditional art from different regions has its palette? Artists historically used pigments and clays available nearby. If you understand local geology, the colors can suggest where a piece was made, and the artwork can reveal the land. Sienna takes its name from Siena in Tuscany, while umber is historically associated with Umbria. And since you've watched this far, leave a like and a comment. I'm an immigrant. Paying the bills isn't easy, and each video takes several days to make while earning $20 or $30. A like costs you nothing, but it could help me keep making videos. Let's return to Siena and umber. The Italian name was Terra di Siena, meaning earth of Siena, because yellow-brown clay, rich in iron oxide, was collected around the region. Naturally, we call it raw sienna. Heat it, and the iron compounds change, turning it warmer and more reddish. That gives us burnt sienna. So burnt was originally quite literal. They roasted the earth. Umber is a darker earth pigment containing more manganese. Raw umber is usually cooler, greener, and darker than raw sienna. Once heated, it becomes warmer and deeper. Burnt umber. But the name is complicated. You'll hear that umber means earth of Umbria, and some sources give that explanation. Other pigment historians argue that the material reached Europe from Turkey, and that the word comes from ombra, meaning shadow, because painters used it for shadows. So the Umbria story is possible but not completely settled. Today, the name on the tube doesn't guarantee that someone dug the pigment out of Tuscany or Umbria. Now I want to correct the portrait, and I've decided to use a toothpick. Yes, really. It's useful when you don't want to add more paint, or when the brush no longer leaves a visible line on the wet surface. A toothpick is a good option. Unlike a pencil, it leaves no graphite. It simply moves or scratches through fresh paint. But if you press too hard, you can puncture the canvas, so keep your hand light. We're adjusting the portrait, not performing surgery. I'm using it to define the lips and eyes more evenly, and make a couple of changes to the ear. We'll paint the ear more precisely at the end, so don't rush, keep watching, and you'll see how it comes together. Most importantly, relax and find some peace in the process of making something. You're giving yourself time that belongs only to you. In the modern world, that can be difficult, because someone always seems to need something from you, so a little selfishness is healthy. For the next few minutes, the world can wait. It's just you and the painting. At this stage, I'm not adding more details. I'm deepening the shadows, strengthening the lights, and creating softer transitions between them. This gives the face more volume while keeping it gentle rather than making it look carved from wood. Start with the most obvious dark areas and the brightest places where the light hits directly. Leave the middle tones alone for now. They are already doing their job, and constantly mixing them with everything around them can quickly turn the entire face into mud. I'm mostly working around the eye socket, beneath the cheekbone, along the nose, and under the jaw. Then I return to the forehead, eyelids, nose, lips, and chin with a lighter mixture. The important thing is not to treat every part of the face equally. Some transitions should remain visible, while others can almost disappear. By the way, did you know that many traditional paint colors have histories far stranger than this portrait? Take cinnabar. It produces an intense red that people have valued for thousands of years. The pigment is made from mercury sulfide. Yes, mercury, the element we now carefully avoid touching, breathing, or spreading around the studio. Natural cinnabar was mined, ground, washed, and turned into pigment. Later, people learned to manufacture its artificial equivalent, vermilion. The process involved combining mercury and sulfur, then grinding and purifying the result. So one of the most magnificent reds in art came from working directly with a toxic metal. And artists loved it. Cinnabar and vermilion appeared in paintings, manuscripts, decorated objects, and ceremonial art across different cultures. It was bright, warm, expensive, and powerful. Perfect when you wanted a red to represent wealth, blood, holiness, or danger. Then there was Scheele's green, developed in the 18th century. It was brilliant, fashionable, relatively inexpensive, and made with arsenic. For a while, this poisonous green seemed to be everywhere. It appeared in artists' materials, wallpaper, fabrics, artificial flowers, toys, and domestic decoration. People were effectively turning their homes into beautiful chemical experiments without fully understanding the danger. Scheele's green was later joined by other arsenic-based colors, including the brighter emerald green. These pigments worked so well that related compounds were also used to kill insects and rodents. The same chemistry could decorate your wall, color a painting, or eliminate pests. There is even a famous theory that Napoleon was exposed to arsenic from green wallpaper during his exile on St. Helena. Arsenic was found in samples of his hair, and his rooms reportedly had green wallpaper. But that doesn't prove the wallpaper killed him. It's a wonderful story, just not a settled historical fact. So whenever you hear that Napoleon was murdered by his interior decorator, remain a little skeptical. And then we have gamboge, a transparent yellow used in Asian art and later by European watercolorists. Unlike cinnabar or Scheele's green, gamboge wasn't dug from the earth or created in a laboratory. It came from trees. The yellow resin was collected from Garcinia trees in South and Southeast Asia. Cuts were made in the bark, and the sap flowed into hollow bamboo stems. It dried inside them, forming solid cylinders that could be transported and sold. An artist could wet the resin and suddenly have a glowing golden yellow. But gamboge also had another use: medicine. Taken internally, it acted as an extremely powerful laxative and purgative. So the same material that created delicate golden light in a painting could also create an extremely unpleasant afternoon. It wasn't a perfect pigment either. Gamboge could fade when exposed to light, so some old paintings and watercolors no longer look the way their artists intended. Today our materials are generally safer and more predictable, although the names on the tubes still carry pieces of those stories. Centuries of people discovering dangerous things through trial and error. So, about my painting course. Seriously, it's useful. It'll help you avoid a lot of the mistakes I made while I was learning. Take a look at the website. You can see the full list of topics and watch some clips from the course. No pressure. Just take a look. Now, let's refine the eye a little. As you can see, from the side, it isn't really round. It looks more like a triangle because most of the eyeball is covered by the eyelids. And the eyelids matter too. The upper lid overlaps the lower one, so on the far side I first place the lower stroke and then put the upper lid over it. Same thing on the closer side. Lower lid first, then a slightly lighter stroke for the upper lid. And keep the eyes fairly dark. Don't paint them with pure white straight from the tube. It usually looks strangely artificial. Grayish violet, warm gray, even slightly yellowish tones usually work much better and keep the eyes connected to the skin. And don't try to outline the whole eye with one dark line. It usually makes it look flat and cartoonish. Instead, let some edges disappear into the shadow and keep only a few sharper accents around the lids and the pupil. That way, the eye still feels like part of the face, not something pasted on top of it. By the way, do you know what time it is? Time to check if you're subscribed to the channel. Okay, now let's clean up everything around the face, add a few accents, and don't forget the ear. I haven't forgotten it, I'm just saving it for the very end. This portrait is also built around pretty strong color contrast. In traditional painting, we often simplify color into 3 basic primaries, red, yellow, and blue, and then build other colors by mixing them. And look at what's happening here. We have this cool blue background, an ochre yellow face, and now I'm introducing these very bright red accessories. So instead of making every part equally colorful, we have 3 large color ideas fighting with each other: cool blue, warm yellow, and these sharp red accents. And this is also why I'm not trying to perfectly blend every transition. At this stage, a few rough edges actually help. If everything becomes equally soft, the portrait starts to feel a little sleepy, and we definitely don't want that. You don't need many of these accents. In fact, if you put them everywhere, they stop being accents at all. Think of them almost like punctuation. Most of the painting can stay relatively quiet, and then you put an exclamation mark exactly where you want the viewer to look. The same thing applies to color. Notice that I'm not trying to make the skin more and more colorful everywhere. Most of it stays fairly muted. That makes these little reds and oranges feel much brighter than they actually are. And this is one of those moments where it's useful to step back from the canvas. Up close, you see individual brushstrokes and tiny imperfections. From a distance, you suddenly see whether the whole face works as one shape. So every now and then, physically move back a little. Or, if you're painting from a photo, look at your painting in a mirror or even take a quick picture with your phone. It's surprisingly good at showing you things your eyes have already started ignoring. At this point, I'm mostly looking for those small inconsistencies. An edge that's too sharp, a shadow that became too dark, or a highlight that needs just one more touch. I also have a video about painting a portrait from the front, so definitely check that one out too. I also show everything there very clearly and in detail how to paint it. Look at my channel or follow the card. And one more accent. Our lady clearly has some character, so I don't want everything around her to feel too quiet or too polite. She looks like someone who could dance flamenco, bachata. Honestly, probably whatever she wants. So this bright red shape in the hair works really well here. Maybe it's a flower, maybe it's a hair clip. For us, that part doesn't really matter. What matters is the color. We already have these smaller red accents around the portrait, and this gives us one stronger spot that ties them together. It also helps balance the composition. The face is quite light and warm. The background is cool and blue, so this little red accent gives the eyes somewhere else to go before coming back to the face. And again, you don't need to paint every detail. Sometimes one simple, confident shape does more than 10 carefully rendered ones. Now look at the ear. Basically, think of a bent letter Y. That Y-shaped ridge is the antihelix, one of the main structures inside the ear. So I start with the darkest part, the opening of the ear canal. Around that, I place the lighter outer rim, And then this Y shape inside. Just bend it slightly toward the back of the head. Of course, we'll make it a little more dimensional. A few darker strokes inside the folds, and some lighter ones where the cartilage catches the light. But notice that I'm not making the ear as bright as the face. Light and shadow are always relative. The whole ear is sitting more in shadow here. At the bottom, the earlobe is basically just this funny little hanging shape. Unlike most of the ear, it doesn't contain cartilage. And here is the tragus, this small piece right in front of the ear canal. It can catch quite a lot of light, and in this portrait it sits roughly along the same visual line as the cheekbone. So don't overcomplicate the ear. Dark opening, outer rim, bent Y, a few folds, little earlobe, done.